Have you ever wondered why it feels so exhausting to simply exist in the world? You wake up tired, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Society tells you to keep smiling, keep hustling, keep pretending that everything's okay. But deep inside, you know it's not. You sense there's something profoundly wrong with the way we're living our lives. But when you speak up, you're labeled as too sensitive, too intense, or too complicated. Here's the uncomfortable truth that no one dares to say out loud. Being truly awake is painful. Awareness isn't always bliss. Sometimes it's agony, because once you see through the shallow scripts of everyday life, you can't unsee them. You're trapped between who you really are and who the world expects you to be. But here's the paradox. The same sensitivity that makes you feel isolated also holds the key to your freedom. In this video, you'll discover why your so-called weakness, your emotional intensity, is actually your greatest strength. You'll uncover how to turn existential loneliness into authentic belonging and transform the invisible weight you carry into a source of profound power. This isn't about easy answers or shallow positivity. It's about reclaiming your right to live without apology. It's about the silent revolution of choosing authenticity in a world addicted to pretending. By the end of this journey, you'll stop feeling guilty for your depth. You'll understand exactly why you never fit in and why that's a very good thing. You'll learn practical ways to protect your energy and live your truth without losing your mind or your relationships. If any of this resonates, hit the like button and subscribe now, because here you never have to apologize for who you are. Let's dive deep together. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you were carrying an invisible backpack filled with heavy stones? That's the unspoken burden of being conscious. It's not about intelligence or education. It's about a certain sensitivity, the kind that makes you notice everything others would rather ignore. You see the sadness behind a forced smile. You feel the tension between two co-workers pretending to be friends. You hear the words, "people don't say." Most people call it overthinking. But you know it's more than that. It's the cost of awakening. And when you wake up in a world addicted to pretending, you carry that weight alone. That's why some days feel heavier than others, even when nothing bad has happened. The truth is, your awareness is always switched on, like an old radio catching every frequency of human suffering and hope all at once. Before we go further, take a moment to check the pinned comment. I've gathered resources to help you feel less alone in this. Now let's look closer. Most people are content to drift through routines, but deep thinkers don't have that luxury. They can't numb themselves to the absurdity of it all. Picture a woman working the night shift at a convenience store. She watches customers shuffle in and out, their eyes glazed from exhaustion. She wonders if anyone else feels the hollow ache in their chest. She can't stop analyzing the patterns, the way people buy junk food to soothe their loneliness, or how they stare at their phones to escape their own thoughts. This is the invisible weight. It's the curse of clarity. You see too much, feel too much, and there's no off switch. Even in moments meant to be simple, like sharing a meal or making small talk, your mind is searching for meaning, and the world tells you to lighten up, but you can't, because pretending would be worse. Carl Jung believed consciousness is a double-edged sword. It brings freedom, but also sorrow. You recognize this when you look back on your life and see how your awareness grew. Remember those times you tried to play along? You laughed at jokes that felt shallow? You agreed with opinions you didn't believe, all to fit in. But inside, something kept whispering, "This isn't you." That whisper is the beginning of your inner revolution. The moment you start honoring that voice, you stop belonging to other people's expectations. And that's terrifying, because humans crave belonging more than almost anything. So you wonder, how do you stay awake without losing connection to the people around you? That question will follow you like a shadow, but it's also the question that can set you free. At work, the weight shows up in 1,000 subtle ways. Maybe you're the one who notices when meetings are just rituals to avoid real conversations. You feel the absurdity when people pretend their job is their identity. You see through the slogans, "We're a family here," when in reality, everyone is replaceable. This awareness can make you feel cynical, but it can also make you compassionate, because you understand that everyone is scared, Everyone is hiding behind a mask, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Some nights you lie awake thinking about your own mask, the ways you've conformed to survive. You wonder if it's even possible to be authentic in a system that rewards performance. These thoughts can feel like a storm you can't outrun. Even relationships are touched by this invisible weight. You notice when your partner's affection becomes routine. You feel when conversations become scripts. You sense when someone says, "I'm fine," but their eyes say, "I'm breaking." This sensitivity is both a gift and a burden. It allows you to love deeply, but it also means you carry the unspoken pain of others. You become the emotional sponge in every room, and over time, that drains you. People don't realize how much energy it takes to feel everything. They call you too serious or too sensitive, but they don't see how much you hold back just to keep the peace. And some days, you question if it's worth it. If your consciousness is a curse, you'd be better without. Yet, in quiet moments, you remember why you can't go back to sleep. Because the alternative is living in denial. It's pretending that superficial conversations are enough. It's ignoring the ache in your chest when life feels empty. You've tried that before. It never worked. The truth is, awareness is not the enemy. It's the compass that points you toward meaning. But in a culture obsessed with speed and distraction, your sensitivity feels like rebellion. Every time you choose to slow down, to feel, to question, you're doing something radical. And radical acts are rarely comfortable, but they are necessary. You might wonder how to carry this weight without collapsing under it. The answer isn't to shut yourself off. It's to learn how to ground yourself, to create spaces where your emotional intensity has room to breathe. That might mean long walks at dawn, journaling before bed, or simply sitting in silence without trying to fix anything. When you make peace with your sensitivity, it becomes a source of strength. You realize you're not here to be like everyone else. You're here to see what others ignore. And that makes you rare, even if it also makes you lonely. As you reflect on all this, notice the tension in your body, the tightness in your chest, the heaviness behind your eyes. That's the cost of being awake, but it's also the beginning of something extraordinary. Because once you stop fighting your awareness, you start transforming it. You start living with intention instead of habit. And that's the only way to create a life that feels true. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when this consciousness starts to separate you from the people you love, and why that loneliness isn't always a tragedy. For now, tell me in the comments, what part of this feels true for you? Have you ever been in a room full of people but felt like you were sealed behind glass? You can see everyone. You can hear the laughter, the casual banter, the jokes that don't land for you. But somehow, none of it feels real. That is the loneliness of not belonging. It's a kind of isolation that has nothing to do with physical distance. It's the ache of knowing you can't shrink yourself enough to fit into the conversations that everyone else seems to enjoy. You notice when people bond over gossip or small talk, and you feel like you're watching a play. Part of you wishes you could just clap along. Another part knows you'd be betraying something sacred inside you. If you've ever sat quietly, nodding while your mind screamed for something deeper, you know this loneliness. It's the tax you pay for caring about what is real, and that tax is steep. In relationships, this feeling can be even more brutal. You may love someone deeply and still feel unseen. They might care about you but never really understand the depth of your questions. You try to explain your sadness, your yearning, your curiosity about existence itself, and you're met with puzzled looks or polite nods. It feels like pouring your soul into a glass that can't hold water. This is why so many deep thinkers become experts at pretending. They learn to ration their truth. They share just enough to avoid being labeled difficult, but never enough to feel understood. And the result is a constant, quiet grief. You can be in love, have friends, a steady job, and still feel like you're living in exile from your own life. Think about your workplace. You probably see the performance everyone else is playing. You see the forced smiles, the status games, the way people cling to titles as if they were shields. And you wonder, does anyone else see how hollow this all is? But saying it out loud feels dangerous. You'd risk being called negative, ungrateful, or worse, unprofessional. So you stay silent. You nod. you blend in. But inside, a part of you is screaming for authenticity. That's the tragedy of awareness. You can see what others can't, but you also feel what others won't. And that gap becomes a canyon you must cross alone every single day. There are moments when you try to bridge that gap. You offer a piece of your truth, a question about meaning, a reflection on why we pretend so much, a confession that you feel lost even when life looks successful. And almost every time the room goes quiet, someone changes the subject, someone laughs nervously. You're left with the unmistakable feeling that your honesty is a burden no one wants to carry. Over time, you start to doubt yourself. You wonder if you're too sensitive, too intense, too much. But let's be clear, you are not too much. You are simply tuned in to a frequency most people have been taught to avoid. And that's not a flaw. It's proof you are alive. This loneliness isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up as fatigue, a heaviness that follows you through the day. Sometimes it feels like an emptiness you can't fill no matter how hard you try. You might scroll social media, searching for someone, anyone, who seems to feel what you feel. You might bury yourself in work or hobbies, trying to outrun the ache. But it always catches up. That's because this loneliness isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that you are awake in a culture that values numbness over truth. And while that can feel unbearable, it is also a kind of freedom. Because once you see the hollowness, you're free to stop pretending it's enough. Carl Jung called this the wound of individuation. It's the pain that comes when you start to separate from the collective illusions that everyone else relies on. It feels like betrayal, like you're abandoning the tribe. And in a way you are. But what no one tells you is that this separation is necessary. It's the first step toward creating a life that reflects who you really are. Yes, it costs you belonging to certain groups. Yes, it can feel like exile, but it also creates space for something truer to enter your life. The only question is whether you will have the courage to endure the in-between. This is why so many people retreat into solitude. They grow tired of diluting themselves to be digestible. They crave spaces where depth isn't shamed, but welcomed. And if you've ever found even one person who sees you without flinching, you know how rare and precious that connection is. It's like finally breathing fresh air after years underwater. The tragedy is that most will never experience it because it requires a willingness to be misunderstood by the majority. But once you taste that kind of connection, the superficial can never satisfy you again. You start to see your loneliness not as a curse, but as proof you refuse to settle for anything less than truth. As you sit with these reflections, ask yourself, where have you been hiding to feel accepted? What parts of your soul have you tucked away so you wouldn't stand out? The loneliness of not belonging is real. But so is the possibility that your isolation is preparing you for a deeper kind of community, a tribe that values consciousness over conformity. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when you stop apologizing for your authenticity and how that choice becomes an act of quiet revolution. Before we go there, tell me in the comments, when have you felt most unseen? There comes a moment in every deep thinker's life when pretending is no longer sustainable. You wake up one day and realize you can't keep rehearsing the same polite script. The meetings where you nod along to empty platitudes, the small talk that feels like sandpaper on your spirit, the forced smiles you've perfected to avoid making others uncomfortable, it all becomes unbearable. This is the threshold of your silent revolution. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There's no grand declaration or rebellion. It's more like a quiet refusal. You stop laughing at jokes you don't find funny. You stop agreeing to things that drain you. You stop betraying your authenticity for the sake of harmony. And in that stillness, something powerful begins to grow. You start to remember who you were before the world convinced you to perform. This revolution is rarely comfortable, because the moment you choose truth over approval, you will lose some people. Friends will drift away. Colleagues will label you difficult. Family members might call you selfish or cold. That's the price of stepping out of the collective trance. You start to see that most relationships were built not on mutual understanding, but on mutual pretending. And once you stop pretending, the scaffolding collapses. This collapse can feel like grief, but hidden inside that loss is a freedom you can't find any other way. For the first time, you feel your own integrity solid beneath your feet. You realize you've been compromising your soul to avoid disappointing others, and you wonder, what would it be like to never do that again? Imagine the factory worker who finally admits he hates the job everyone else pretends to love, or the mother who stops performing the role of the perfect parent and confesses her exhaustion, or the young man who tells his friends he doesn't care about status or money but craves meaning. These confessions are small acts of revolution. They don't make headlines, but they change lives. Because every time you choose to be authentic, you invite others to do the same. Your honesty becomes permission for others to stop hiding. It's contagious in the best way. But make no mistake, most people will resist this invitation. They will call your honesty inconvenient. They will try to shrink you back into the familiar shape you outgrew. Carl Jung believed that true transformation begins the moment you refuse to keep performing. He called it individuation, a process of becoming who you really are, even if it means standing alone. This is not an easy path. It requires you to confront your own fear of abandonment, to tolerate the loneliness that follows when you no longer fit neatly into other people's expectations. But it also offers something precious, a life aligned with your values. You stop measuring your worth by how well you can conform. You start measuring it by how honestly you can live. And that shift changes everything. In practical terms, this means setting boundaries that feel terrifying. It means saying no when you've been conditioned to say yes. It means risking conflict in order to protect your energy. You might lose relationships that were never truly reciprocal. You might disappoint people who benefited from your compliance. But what you gain is worth it. You gain the capacity to look in the mirror and feel respect for the person staring back. You gain the peace that comes from knowing you no longer have to pretend. This peace is the foundation of real belonging, the kind that can never be taken away. One of the greatest myths in modern culture is that authenticity is easy, that you can just be yourself and everyone will applaud. But in reality, authenticity threatens the status quo. It disrupts the silent agreements we make to keep life predictable. When you stop playing your assigned role, you force others to question theirs, and not everyone is ready for that. Some will resent you for it. They'll accuse you of arrogance or selfishness. But you will know the truth. You're simply tired of living in a story that doesn't belong to you. And the longer you stay true to yourself, the less you'll need anyone's permission. This revolution doesn't happen overnight. It unfolds in 1,000 quiet decisions. You start honoring your own instincts instead of outsourcing your truth. You let go of the friendships that can't hold your depth. You create new rituals that nourish your spirit instead of numbing it. Over time, you build a life that feels real in every corner. And though it may be smaller in some ways, fewer connections, fewer distractions, it is infinitely richer, because nothing compares to the peace of living without a mask. As you listen to this, notice the part of you that feels both afraid and relieved. Afraid of the loneliness that might come with authenticity. Relieved that you no longer have to pretend. That is the doorway to your transformation. In the next part of this journey, we'll talk about how to integrate this authenticity into daily life, so you don't have to choose between truth and connection. But for now, take a breath. Feel the weight you've been carrying. And ask yourself, what would change if you never again apologized for who you are? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now take a moment to feel the weight you've been carrying all these years. Not the weight of failure, but the weight of consciousness. The burden of seeing through the illusions everyone else depends on. And ask yourself, what if this isn't something to hide anymore? What if your depth is the very thing that could transform your life and the lives of everyone brave enough to look beneath the surface? Imagine what could happen if, just for one day, you stopped apologizing for your intensity. If you refused to shrink to fit into conversations that feel hollow, if you allowed yourself to be fully seen, even by a world that may never understand you, what would that version of you look like? How would it feel to belong to yourself first, before seeking belonging anywhere else? I want you to think about this. What parts of your truth have you been sacrificing to be accepted? What dreams have you set aside because they made other people uncomfortable? And most of all, what would it mean to finally trust that your sensitivity your awareness, your questions are not liabilities, but rare gifts. If any of this sparked something inside you, don't let it fade. Take one small step today to honor your depth. Maybe that means journaling the truths you've been too afraid to say out loud. Maybe it means speaking up in a meeting or telling someone you love that you're done pretending. Your life doesn't have to look like everyone else's to be meaningful. Leave a comment below and tell me, what's the one truth you're ready to stop hiding? I read every word and I'd love to hear your story. If you found value in this, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. And don't forget to check the resources I've shared in the first pinned comment. They might be exactly what you need right now.